Thank you very, very much, Danny. Thank you for your leadership of the commemoration, Yom HaShoah. Thank you for the invitation extended to me and from you, Leslie Berger, the Chairman of the New South Wales Board of Deputies, and Vic Aladoff, to be the speaker here this evening. It is my privilege to be so, and I know everyone has been recognised, but I particularly recognise, of course, the survivors that are here, and broader members of the Jewish and non-Jewish communities are here for a common commemoration, and also my friends and members of Parliament and local government. I lived in St Ives, so I feel in many ways that I'm coming home, and in the context of an election, when you get 70% of the primary vote in the booths at St Ives, you're especially keen to come back. So thank you very much. And amongst my many friends here, Rabbi Shapiro, wonderful, wonderful man. I also had one of my life-changing experiences here at Masada College. I was Minister for Education, Science and Training, and it was 2005, and I was here to officially open an extension to redevelopment of the college, and we reached the point for the ceremonial cutting of the ribbon. And Rabbi Ruggett had this very large pair of scissors, and he said to the very large assembled audience of the college, he said, Minister, I know that you probably get a bit nervous with a rabbi coming toward you with some scissors. This is purely for ceremonial purposes. And so I said, by way of response to the audience, I said, look, I'm a Roman Catholic. I've had one or two run-ins with the Pope. But I'm a great admirer of the Jewish faith and the Jewish people. But having said that, I'm not yet ready to come over, but I am anatomically prepared. So, yeah. I firstly apologise to you for the length of what I'm about to say to you. I very, very rarely write any speeches and very rarely read any, but I've put a little bit of effort into this, and it will take longer than the 20 minutes that I was asked to speak to you. I look on the bright side and think you won't ask me back again. But I think it's particularly important that a non-Jewish person lay some milestones. A desire for knowledge for its own sake, a love of justice that borders on fanaticism, a striving for personal independence. These, Albert Einstein said, are the Jewish tradition, which allow me to regard belonging to it as a gift of great fortune. He said, history has imposed upon us a difficult task. But if we remain devoted servants of truth, justice and freedom, we will not only persist as the longest living peoples, but we will, as before, achieve through our labours great works that contribute to the ennoblement of humanity. So said Albert Einstein, arguably one of the greatest Jewish members of the human race of the 20th century. It's a humbling privilege for me to address you here, especially in the presence of survivors of the Holocaust or the Shoah. You have lived, endured, and forgotten more about what brings us here than I will ever know, and yet you invite me to speak. We pause here 80 years after the outbreak of the Second World War, a cataclysm spanning 6 years. It remains the most destructive conflict in human history. A life was extinguished every 3 seconds. It claimed 60 million lives, including 6 million Jews, 1.5 million of them children, murdered in the Holocaust, along with political dissidents, gypsies, Roma and homosexuals. humankind moved from one age to another. The world would never be the same again. We gather 74 years after the arrival at Auschwitz of the Soviet forces from the 60th Army of the Ukrainian front. The liberators would find some 7,650 barely living souls, hundreds of thousands of personal effects, and 700 tons of human hair. As many as 1.5 million people, mainly Jews, had been murdered here. With awkward humility, abiding reverence, we pause here to honour them all. We do so in renewed commitment to one another, to our nation, and to the ideals of mankind. In commemorating the dead, we are inspired by the triumph of the human spirit given to us, all of us, by those who survived. We are challenged, Jews and members of the human race, to make this history live, to make it live in ways that evoke and embed memory, leading us always to our best inner selves. You don't realise what you're learning when you're learning it. And I say to young people that it's often the most simple things in unexpected circumstances and random moments of quiet revelation that most significantly challenge, shape, and transform your outlook in life, and often when you least expect. And the power is in the story. Hearing of my appointment as Director of the Australian War Memorial in 2012, a close friend said to me, "You're going to do what? You're going to run the Australian War Memorial?" He said, "You're wasting your life. I can't believe you're doing that. You've got far more important things," he said, "to do for Australia than rearrange its history." I said to him, in part, it has much more to do with the future than it does our past. The past holds important lessons that are vital to our future. History is the guiding discipline. It informs choices that are now before us, and it can also demolish prejudice and lead us to new horizons. In a world that isn't simply changing, in my view, but where humankind crosses the threshold to a new age, as it did in the late 15th century, we must be clear about who we are, in what we believe, and the truths by which we live. The most important year in Australia's history is 1788. Millennia of rich Aboriginal history, custodianship and culture was devastated by the arrival of the British First Fleet. But from that event and everything that would follow, the origins of the Australia we are and the people we have now become. When that first fleet arrived, 1,420 people, half of them convicts, including Jews. The next most important year in our history is 1942. Australia's vital interests were at stake, from Singapore to the Coral Sea, Kokoda and beyond. But also in January 1942, a world away in the outer lakeside Berlin suburb of Wannsee, was a meeting convened by Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was the Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, appointed by Reich Marshal Göring as the plenipotentiary for the preparation of the final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. The final solution would apply to 11 million Jews. This was new. Heydrich said that the meeting sought to obtain, and I quote, "clarity of principle and coordination of central agencies." Responsibility for handling the final solution would be with him and with him on. Without a whimper, the 13 officials signed off on the final solution. The minutes would record their decision to cleanse the German living space of Jews in a legal manner. As Heydrich convened the meeting, deportations from the Lodz ghetto to the Chelmno death camp progressed, and they reveal much of the unfolding horror. Shlomo Frank recorded it in his diary. Deportees were poor, broken, naked, and starved. All cried mournfully. Mothers embraced little children. From the basement of a derelict building in Chelmno, stripped of belongings, naked and showered, they were herded up a ramp through a hole in the wall to the back of gas vans. The vans used bottled carbon monoxide, then piped exhaust fumes into the van packed with victims. The corpses were pulled from the vans by Jewish prisoners, who dragged the bodies to pits dug by Polish workers. At day's end, the Jewish prisoners were forced into the pits themselves to be shot by the SS. Only 4 Jews escaped from Chelmno. One was Zalma Weiner, assigned to ancillary tasks, who made it to the Warsaw Ghetto in January 1942. His deposition reads, "The corpses were thrown out of the vans like garbage onto a heap. They were dragged by the feet and the hair. 2 people stood at the edge of the ditch and threw the bodies into the grave. 2 others placed them face down so that the head of one was placed next to the feet of another. If there was an empty space, the corpse of a child was stuffed in there. The 8 workers were ordered into the pit and shot." Weiner recounted 2 German civilians searching corpses of valuables. They tore off necklaces, pulled rings off fingers, pulled out gold teeth. They even looked into anuses and, with the women, genitalia. Several of the Jewish forced labour prisoners helped one another suicide. On the 13th of January, the unloading crew discovered a live baby in one of the vans, hidden in a pillowcase. The SS men laughed. They shot the child with a machine gun and threw it into the grave. With brutal efficiency, less than 100 SS guards exterminated some 97,000 Jews from the Lodz ghetto at Chelmno, needing 900 trucks to transport clothing and valuables looted from the dead. It was also in 1942 that the great British poet T.S. Eliot wrote these prophetic words: "A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of endless moments." A nation that does not know nor understand its history is dangerous. The events that bring us here tonight and upon which we reflect have everything to do with us, our future, and the people that we strive to be. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free. The first line of our national anthem. We sing it often, we hear it sung often, but far less often do we pause to reflect on what that really means. And therein lies one of life's great paradoxes. It's often those things that are most important to us in our lives that as human beings we have a tendency to take for granted. The magic vitality of your youth you won't appreciate until it's finally gone forever. Families who love us give meaning and context to our lives. Whether conferred by birth or by choice, our citizenship as Australians, enjoying political, economic and religious freedoms. We live in a country where faith coexists with reason, free academic inquiry, a free press, an independent judiciary. We are Australians, but we are defined much less by our constitution, the machinery of a democracy given us by the British, than we are by our values, our beliefs, the way we relate to one another and see our place in the world. We are shaped most by our triumphs and our failures, our heroes, those whom we honour, and our villains. The way as a people we have endured and been shaped by adversity, and how we will face the adversities that are coming and respond to emerging, unseen, and increasingly threatening horizons. Nations, like any one of us, like people, face moments of truth. They are moments in history which challenge our very survival and our values. Well led, we emerge stronger, more resilient. But if not, they may do us lasting damage. Those who survived fled and found their way to Australia in the aftermath of the Second World War and the Shoah made our nation. More than simply help our economic and social reconstruction after the war, they nourished our better instincts, gave us in the longer term a greater belief in ourselves and a deeper understanding in this modern Australia of what it means to be an Australian. I visited Washington in various roles some 30 times over the last 20 years. And irrespective of the time constraints on my program, there are two places I always go. One speaks to the evil darkness of which we are all capable of descending in certain circumstances, and the other to the ideals of mankind. The first is the Holocaust Museum. I always go there. Thousands and thousands of shoots. Video footage of Nazi doctors having crossed a threshold in the 1930s, with state sanctioning, experimenting on the disabled and the insane, ending lives that were regarded as being no longer of any value. And then there are the photographs, hundreds and hundreds of photographs, black and white photographs, men, women, adolescents, children, looking out into lives that were incompletely lived. And high on the second floor is a photograph of a woman called Rosa Goldensea. She was a Hungarian woman of advancing years who arrived with her daughters at Auschwitz in the spring of 1944, when 12,000 Jews a day were being exterminated. As selection commenced on the rail platform, she quickly grasped the situation. She turned to her daughter, holding her baby, and said, "They're saving any women with children. Give me the baby." Rosa knew by her own age and that of the baby that they were already dead. I often ask myself, what moral courage did she draw upon to make the decision to save her own daughter, and in doing so give up her own life and that of a cherished grandchild? From the Holocaust Museum, I then go to the Jefferson Memorial. Thomas Jefferson, first Secretary of State of the United States, third President, and I look up to those words enshrined in marble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to uphold these rights, governments are instituted among men. Jefferson, toward the end of his life, was asked to nominate his greatest achievement. He didn't say being president. He said, "I want my life to be remembered for three things. The first is the American Declaration of Independence. The second, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. But the third," he said, "was his most important legacy, and that was co-founding the University of Virginia." And when he was asked why, after all he had achieved, why that? He said, because education is the defence of the nation. That it is education, more than anything else, that will protect us from ideas and attitudes deeply rooted in ignorance and forged on an anvil of prejudice. A year after I took up this role at the War Memorial, I had one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, let alone my tenure in this job. Memorial staff proposed a temporary exhibition of artworks by one of the Memorial's Second World War official war artists. Alan Moore was a name that meant nothing to me. Alan Moore had been commissioned as an official Australian war artist during the Second World War. He deployed in 1944. I scanned the images of his works and asked, when did he die? Unsure of the answer, and following some inquiries, the staff came to me the next day. They said he's alive, he's living in a nursing home in Victoria, he's 99. So I put in a call myself to see what sort of shape he was in. So at the age of 99, Alan was able to come to the memorial to view works that had never been exhibited together and that he had not seen for 60 years. He arrived in a jacket and a cravat and wearing the beret that he'd worn through his deployment. Before an enormous media pack, I slowly pushed him in his wheelchair along his works, through the Southwest Pacific, Northern Africa, and a V-2 rocket attack that he witnessed in London and then drew. We paused at each as he spoke with emotion of the subject matter. We then stopped at 3, confronting works at which point he physically trembled. Alan Moore was with the British when they liberated Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. He gestured to a charcoal drawing of the SS guards removing dead women and children from a railway carriage to a burial pit. The Welsh Guard, he said. I was drawing this, and the Welsh Guard said, no one will ever believe it. And I thought, yes, he's right. I went and got a camera. A second work portrayed nondescript buildings and a perimeter fence. There were multiple objects scattered across the ground. A lean, stooped figure standing in their midst. Alan said, the blind man with the stick. He was walking among the dead and didn't know it. That day was the first time since he'd done these Holocaust works that they had ever been hung at the Australian War Memorial. When I asked why, I learned that generations of my predecessors had repeatedly said to him, no one is interested in the Holocaust. When Alan died in September 2015, I had his Holocaust work sent to his funeral in Ballarat. I looked more closely then at what exactly did we have in relation to the Holocaust in the immense Second World War galleries at the memorial. 7 small images. I told our staff we would appropriate an area adjacent to the World War II galleries and construct a permanent Holocaust exhibition. And as Danny said, not everybody was happy with this. One critic said emphatically, this has nothing to do with Australia and the Australian War Memorial. You're breaching your charter. I will never walk through it. Why, I asked, as I asked of others with similar views. Why, I asked, did you think we were fighting the Second World War in the first place if it was not against Nazism, fascism and totalitarianism? In a world grappling with the mass movement of people, the persecution of political, ethnic and religious minorities, the push for state-sanctioned euthanasia, and a generational struggle against resurgent totalitarianism, principally but not only in the form of Islamic extremism, we must remind ourselves not only of why we fought wars, but that of which humankind is capable of descending and the circumstances that lead to it. The Holocaust Witnesses and Survivors opened in late 2016. This permanent exhibition presents the Holocaust through the stories of survivors who made their new lives in post-war Australia. The rise of Nazism, the Wannsee Conference, transportation, the horrors of gas chambers, ghettos and persecution. The raw, powerful drawings of Bernard Slovic when he was interred at Janowska depict death. They present a harrowing and deeply personal account of the callous, bureaucratic killing of the Jews of Lvov. He would escape and make his way to Australia in 1948. Of the bunk beds he drew in the Janowska concentration camp, where lay those who would be executed in the Belzec gas chambers, Slovic wrote, 3 high, the bunks, 2 to a mattress, 400 souls in one barrack, like logs they lie, exhausted, to sleep, sleep, sleep. rest, forgetfulness. 400 broken people, not father, not wife, not child, not brother, not sister, just 400 beings, some screaming, nightmares, memories. Surely it is all one fantastic nightmare. His drawing of the naked women before their murder by camp guards hangs next to another of begging children brutally forced into cattle cars for the journey to the Belzec gas chambers. Artefacts, documents and relics from the Jewish Holocaust Centre bring stories of suffering and survival to life. Alan Moore's Bergen-Belsen works are now permanently and proudly displayed. As a non-Jew, in my opinion, Jewish identity has been shaped by three significant forces. Anti-Semitism, which remains a repugnant and virulent force in far too many hearts and parts of the world. The Holocaust, or the Shoah, and the embattled daily existential challenges of the state of Israel, surrounded as it is by theocracies and autocracies, and a remarkable nation of democracy. Anti-Semitism is far from a feature of modern history. The Roman Empire embraced Christianity. In doing so, anti-Semitism played a catalytic role in building the foundations of the religion that would supersede Judaism. European and Western civilization was largely defined by Christianity, which at various times used anti-Semitism to meet its political and theological objectives. Anti-Semitism at different times has been seemingly ubiquitous, found in major religions, the political left and the political right, educated classes and the illiterate poor. It was into this context the 19th century arrived. The bitter hardships experienced by the Germans after the First World War radicalised anti-Semitism. The Weimar Republic legitimised violence as a form of control that was acceptable to the educated upper classes. Hitler was able to take advantage of two things, and people like him always are. The first was that the majority were indifferent to the plight of the minority. And the second was that in Germany, as in other parts of Europe, anti-Semitism was deeply rooted, religious, secular, racial. And anti-Semitism, of course, did not end with the trials, the formation of the United Nations. Anti-Zionism, Holocaust denial, distortion of truths, glorification of Nazism have all featured and still do. Today, troops are deployed across Europe, protecting synagogues and Jewish places of congregation. Bombings, desecration of cemeteries and other violations of freedom are real, present and escalating dangers. In 340 BC, in Plato's Republic, Socrates concluded that the root of all evil is ignorance. One hesitates to argue with him. But when I think back to Wannsee, I think back to those 13 German ministers who signed off on the final solution. 9 of the 13 had the very best education that Europe had to offer. Master's degrees, PhDs. Adolf Eichmann, who was Heydrich's henchman, in charge of implementing all this, said at his trial that Heydrich had expected opposition to the plan at Wannsee, but instead they embraced it with enthusiasm. It's more than education, it's character. Character derives from the Greek word, means the impression left in wax by a stone seal ring. The Greeks called it stamp of personality. And what transcends everything else in life, rank, power, money, influence, intellect, looks, talent, is character, informed by worthwhile intrinsic virtues. To me, ethical and responsible citizenship relies on 3 things. The first is a minimum level of education and also of scientific literacy, which enables us to understand and be resilient to changes in society, including the technologies upon which it's increasingly built. The second is we all need to be imbued with what Graham Davison described in the Uses and Abuses of Australian History as the imaginative capacity to see the world through the eyes of others. Almost all of life's suffering and pain, in my experience, comes from people and nations making themselves the centre of their own lives. And the third is People need to be imbued with a deep value system that informs character. As Benjamin Franklin and Edmund Burke observed, we must be virtuous and have strength of character in order to enjoy our freedoms. The stories of survivors, the qualities embedded in their humanity and spirit are surely one powerful guide to the future. Among their values, courage, physical and moral, endurance, devotion, independence, loyalty, honesty, love of others, and never forgetting from where you came, who gave you what you have and made you who you are. And that is why museums and memorials are what are so important to our common future. The responsibility we share in this common endeavour is to make these stories live, to make them engaging to and engaged by a new generation. It's tempting, human beings that we are, to settle for headlines, broad brushstrokes, popular imagery and mythology about history. Our comfortable lives breed easy indifference, do individual acts of moral and physical courage, lives given in the name of all that is good, and triumph of the human spirit. The key is to invite people to look beyond the narrow prism of their own lives to that of others. These stories, your stories, are ones of individual persecution, survival in the face of unimaginable adversity, and yet also the liberating power of the most fragile yet powerful of human emotions, and that is hope. Often just one image or one story can captivate the imagination of others, educating and inspiring them to be better people. The paradox of the Australian War Memorial is that it's not actually about war. Instead, from the horror and the bloodshed of war, emerge stories of love and friendship. Love for friends and between friends, love of family, love of our country, and honouring men and women who've devoted their lives not to themselves, but to us, and their last moments to one another. The most engaging and popular story depicted in a magnificent bronze by Peter Corlett is of John Simpson Kirkpatrick and his donkey with a wounded man on him as people approach the front of the Australian War Memorial. Disobeying orders at Gallipoli, he had a donkey, he went up the ravines, and over 3 weeks he rescued 40 wounded men. He was shot and killed by a sniper. His mother wrote the epitaph for his headstone at Anzac Cove for a grave she would never see. I gave my son. He gave his life so that others might live. Historians, military purists, their eyes roll about Simpson and his donkey. And I say to them, I love yous all, but you don't get it. I said there is a nobility in a man that loves an animal, and a man and an animal risking their lives for the lives of others. And the lesson in this for all of us is that a life of value is one spent in the service of other human beings, irrespective of the cost to ourselves. The second is also a Corlett bronze of a man called Weary Dunlop, a surgeon tendering to Australians suffering under the brutality of the Japanese on the Burma-Thai Railway in the Second World War. Gazing down, holding his hat in one hand, he evokes the care and compassion for others in the most extreme circumstances. Doing so, he engages a story of inspiring humanity rather than the heinous events in which it was given. People can't comprehend war unless they've been in one. But they do engage, and they relate to the human emotions and motives evoked by those two images and the stories they tell. Two simple but powerful offerings also for memory that we have done. Every night from dusk to dawn, we project the name of each one of our 102,800 dead onto the front of the Australian War Memorial just below the dome. We have people out there every night, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just waiting to see a name. Some of them have driven right across the country just to do it. And the reason that we do so is that so they look beyond these headlines to the individual stories. Early in my tenure, I proposed that we should have Year 6 students, average age 10, record the name and age of death of every one of our 62,000 First World War dead. My staff said it wasn't possible. We sent students into 35 ABC regional studios on a single day and recorded 12,000 names and ages of death. Google built an app for us called Remember Me. The schools log in, the kids download the names, record them and upload them. When we publicly launched it, in front of a microphone, I asked an 11-year-old, I said, what did it mean to you? He said, I now know that they were real people, just like me, and they weren't made up. Visitors walk along the First World War Roll of Honour and they just hear these young voices reciting the names. And therein lays the key challenge and response to Holocaust memorials. We need to personalise in a public and engaging way the stories of individuals so the next generation doesn't think they were simply made up. People engage not so much with the presentation of horror, but with the inspiring human qualities that emerge from it. Memorials to the Holocaust need to be mainstreamed, in my humble opinion. Too often they are confined to Jewish institutions, sacred Jewish places, and broader Jewish communities. They should be visible reminders to all of us, not so much of what was done, but the human spirits and qualities informing character that inspire us to be better people, repositories of love and ennobled memory. In the end, we honour them best by the way we live our lives, we shape our nation and contribute to a better world. We all have to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. Hope that next week will be better than this, that next year will be better than this year. Not so much for ourselves, but those whom we love and our country. And hope is most sustained by men and women who reach out in support of one another. It seems we live increasingly in a world of fundamentalist intolerance and moral relativism. We now face a resurgent totalitarianism, principally, but as I said, not only in the form of Islamic extremism. Disparate groups have hijacked the good name of Islam to build a violent political utopia. We live in vast ignorance of the decisions that we make and the long-term consequences of decisions that are made for us. And we face extraordinary global upheaval and immense technological change. And what we need most in this is one another. No human being, no Australian who believes in the dignity of man and of freedom should ever allow these events, these people, these lives and stories to become a distant stranger. The Shoah and those who survived it teach us many things. It includes a commitment to one another, of conscience and knowing the right thing to do and when to do it, feeling the pain of others and seeing the world through their eyes. Most importantly, they inspire us to have the moral courage, irrespective of personal circumstances, to act on what in our own hearts we know to be right. In the words of the great 17th century Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant, every human being is an end unto himself and not a means to be used by others. Respect for one's own humanity will be found in respect for the humanity of others, and morality is freedom. Failure to do so will render us blind to injustice, deaf to despair, and indifferent to the future. With respect to John Donne, I ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for me, for we are young and we are